Hi guys, suspension should be your number one objective when it comes to setting up your e-bike. It is there primarily to enable your tyres to maintain traction with the ground. Of course, there can be some oversights, so today let's have a look at some of them and how to get them fixed. Now, some of the bigger shapes of the ground are actually taken care of by our arms and by our legs as we're riding. However, we all want our e-bikes to be playful and reactive. And there's no better place to start than having equal pressure or equal spring rate front and rear on your e-bike. One of the first mistakes I see people making is not having enough air pressure or the wrong spring rate in the front fork. And what this does is cause a forward weight bias in the bike, which means you're not going to have enough traction on that rear tyre. Also, by having the fork too soft, it means you're not going to be using the most of that fork. You're not going to be using it to its full potential. The third impact could be you're going to be getting lots of pedal strike because the bike's going to be lower on the front. And of course, it's going to have a negative impact to the well-being of the bike because that fork is going to be bottoming out too often. So, how do you remedy it? Well, very simply. Now, on a lot of fork legs, it's got the correct air pressure for each rider weight, all noted down there, so you can set it up really easily. Some brands have actually got it on their manufacturing website, or indeed, just look at the sag yourself, which is something we're going to talk about a little later on. Now, the second mistake is obviously going to follow on from the first, and this time it's by having too much air in your fork or too hard a spring rate. And what this does is creates a rearward bias to the bike. So when you're climbing, the front wheel is going to be in the air all too often, and that's going to affect your control. It also will mean you're going to have quite a harsh, quite a bumpy ride, which means there's going to be more fatigue in your body when you're riding your bike. The way to solve it, again, as in the first instance, is to get the sag correct on your bike by referring to the fork pressure on the fork leg or on the manufacturer's website. Now, the next point is relate everything I talked to about the fork and transfer that to the rear damper, such things as the sag height. So what is sag? Well, sag is the amount a bike compresses when a rider's on board in the static position. And when you're setting up your sag, it's actually quite easy. A lot of the time, the markings are going to be on the fork leg or on the rear damper. And what you're looking at is about 30% on the front and 30% on the rear. Some people go for 20%. It depends on the amount of fork travel or rear travel on your bike. So sag then is a really important aspect of the bike, and make sure you keep on top of it because you might lend a bike out, or someone just might mess around with your bike and affect the whole balance of your bike because the sag's incorrect front and rear. Next point is very simple. Don't forget to keep your lockout on your fork or your shock absorber in the off position, because I don't think you need to have lockout or harsh compression on your e-bike. So I want to point out that if you're riding tarmac roads or fire roads, then actually lockout is quite a good thing to have on your e-bike. But when you're doing technical climbs, you need to make sure that they're off so the tyres maintain traction with the ground. Right, compression settings. Now this is an incredibly difficult subject to tackle, and it actually varies from brand to brand with fork and suspension manufacturers.
So the compression adjustment commonly found on forks and shocks is low speed compression. So this essentially helps stop the fork or shock moving to your body weight.
But ultimately, I think what you can do with an e-bike is have less tokens in your fork or in your shock absorber and run a little bit more compression instead of that. Obviously, it all starts at a really good setup with your air pressure. Now, the mistake some people make when it comes to compression is sometimes they have too much compression, that's turning it too much in the plus direction, which leads to a very harsh ride, which can be quite fatiguing on your hands. On the other side of it, some people tend to have too little compression, which means the fork can dive too much especially when you're going down descents. How do you tackle that? Well, it's very difficult, and I think it's something that each of you need to fine tune. It's a skill it's a learned skill over time. So I'd say that is the technique to solve that problem. So the mistake I'm trying to get across here is people do not try to understand what compression does. So what I can suggest you do to remedy that is stick your compression in the middle setting and then do a ride with it plus or minus each way, so you get a feeling of what the fork on your bike and the suspension on your bike actually does with different settings on it. Rebound is probably one of the most important setup skills to get right on an e-bike. And the reason for this is because e-bikes are generally a little bit heavier, we still want them to be playful and reactive.
So rebound controls the rate at which the fork or the shock extends.
We want to be able to move the bike around on the trail to avoid obstacles such as roots and rocks whilst we're riding. So rebound is actually quite key to this, and in general you need your rebound to be faster. So what do we mean then by having the suspension faster? Well, in general it means turning the rebound dial more in the minus direction rather than the plus direction, which actually makes it slower. If you do have your suspension too slow, what it'll do is the suspension will not be able to deal with successive hits when you're going down the trail. So ultimately it'll pack down and simply not work. If you've got the suspension too fast, on the other hand, it could actually mean that your bike's going to be working like a spring pogoing down the trail. So as I mentioned with compression, the mistake here is not actually getting tuned in to getting your rebound right. So it comes back to taking your bike out, put it in the middle rebound position, both front and rear. Remember, you want to have a balanced ride here, and just experiment it. Go 2 clicks front, 2 clicks rear, and just get a feeling for what your individual fork and rear damper is doing when you're on the trail. Obviously, another key part to suspension mistakes or oversights is getting carried away with riding your bike and forgetting to get it serviced. Now, e-bikes, because of the heavier weight and possibly more riding, you are going to wear out those components. The fork and the shock is definitely going to get a lot more use than normal. So nothing lasts forever. Either take it down a shop or get tuned into doing your servicing at home. And that's pretty much it. Those are the basics of keeping your e-bike lively. 2 final things. Don't forget to check your shock bolt is not loose or worn out in your rear damper. And then the bushings, both in your fork legs and also in your suspension linkage just here. It varies from brand to brand, but make sure they're not seized, because that's have a massive effect on the performance of your bike. Hope you like this video. Don't forget you can subscribe to eMBN so we can bring you more e-bike content. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video and leave your thoughts below on basic suspension mistakes. If you want to see some more setup videos, check out this one I've done on e-bike geometry here, which actually relates to what I just talked about.